For some people, there's no better place to be on a summer's day than a nudist beach. But there are others who wouldn't even dream of going there. Some people's mouths water as they choose a lobster from the tank at their favorite restaurant. It doesn't spoil their appetites a bit to know that the lobster is about to be boiled alive. But for others, the very idea makes them gag. If tastes and values differ among individuals, they differ even more among countries and cultures. One country is a democracy. Others are dictatorships, monarchies, whatever. People and cultures differ so widely that many philosophers have wondered, are there any universal standards, even in morality?
I think a lot of people have the view that we're the big melting pot, lots of cultures are here, they have different moralities in at least some respects. As long as the different cultures respect each other, we shouldn't use your moral view to criticize other moralities, but you should try to understand them. That kind of view, I think, is widespread.
Over the past few decades, most Western countries have experienced a tremendous increase in cultural diversity. Once Arab robes were a rare sight, but now they're common. They no longer strike people as unusual. They're just clothes. People walking around a city are no longer surprised to come across a mosque. Today, people are doing business and taking vacations in places they never thought of going before. In those places, they experience being the foreigner. And even if they don't travel, the other side of the world is never far away. Television and other media constantly expose viewers to customs and lifestyles different from their own. And through all of this, they become aware that even their deepest beliefs are not the only way of looking at things. This is the point of departure for moral relativism.
A moral relativist is somebody who thinks, first of all, that there is no single true morality, but secondly, there are a variety of possible moralities, and we should. It isn't that we should abandon morality the way an atheist thinks, for example, we should abandon religion or theism anyway. We should adopt a morality and we should accept it, but realize it's not the only possible morality and it's not the single true morality.
Values and beliefs not only vary from culture to culture, they vary from time to time. You don't have to go very far back in history to see striking changes. Take, for instance, the change in attitude toward marriage and the roles of men and women in it. Until the 1960s, the predominant pattern in the West was to fall in love, become engaged, then get married. There was no need to think about who was going to do what. The husband was the breadwinner, and the wife did the housekeeping and took care of the children. That was all there was to it. Today, it's up in the air what family values ought to apply. If people don't get married, is it all right for them to live together? Is it all right to live together, but wrong to have children out of wedlock? If a couple does have children, does the mother have a duty to stay at home? Does the father stay at home if the mother can't? Or is it all right to use daycare? These questions simply were not asked in the 1950s, at least not by many people. But now, will the man be a house husband? Will the woman drive a bus? There's a thin line between what's cultural and what's moral. Would their parents or grandparents or next-door neighbor say the way they're living is wrong? If you think people should be free to make these choices, then you are leaning toward moral relativism.
Some people say that moral relativism is the view that there's no single correct morality. There are all these different moralities, and it's that plus the view that we ought to respect other people's morality, where the second thing is treated as a absolute moral principle that holds no matter what your moral view is. So in that kind of statement of moral relativism is inconsistent, because the first part says there isn't a single true morality, and then the second part says, well, there is this much that's a part of a single true morality, namely you've got to respect everybody's moral view.
People differ, cultures differ, and ideas about what is done and what is not done differ too. Some people will no doubt raise an eyebrow at these scenes. In the Maasai culture, taking blood from this cow isn't considered cruel to the animal. It's as normal as taking its milk. The blood provides valuable vitamins and minerals. Mixed with milk, it's a favorite drink of young children. The cow doesn't seem to suffer. It simply goes on with its life. This is just how the Maasai keep their cattle. In fact, when you think about it, isn't it strange that most people in the West aren't shocked by this picture? Livestock being raised in crowded stalls, only to be killed and eaten in all sorts of forms? We take our own way of life for granted. We learn our system of values and beliefs from our parents and teachers, and sometimes we don't even realize we have one. We simply think we're doing things the way they should be done.
Here I am in one culture, and I want to make a judgment about somebody in another culture. Whose morality should I use? Should I use my morality, or should I use their morality? I can certainly think that things that are happening in this other culture are bad. Bad for the people there, maybe, and certainly bad for maybe their neighbors. And in making that judgment, I have to use my values and perhaps the values of my culture.
Our own moral background determines how we see other people. If we didn't have this background, we wouldn't have a framework to praise or condemn anyone. It's September 1994. The Dutchman Johan van Dam is sentenced to death for smuggling drugs into Singapore. The Dutch people are up in arms. They consider capital punishment barbaric. The Dutch foreign minister pursues every diplomatic channel to save Van Dam's life.
Het feit van de doodstraf zelf, dat is zo'n...
The whole idea of a death penalty is so alien to our culture that Dutch people find it very difficult to accept this outcome to the trial.
Deze uitkomst van dat proces te aanvaarden.
Singapore's foreign minister presents the other side of the picture.
As Singapore's foreign minister, I must say that I respect...
As Foreign Minister of Singapore, I respect the standpoint of countries that are against capital punishment.
But we ask
them to show the same respect for Singapore, which happens to have the death penalty.
In Singapore, drug smuggling carries an automatic death penalty. The views of Singapore and the Netherlands are irreconcilable. But does that mean one must suspend all judgment?
It's very good that we have different cultures. It's very good that people have different attitudes for lots and lots of reasons. It makes the world more interesting. It makes literature and art more interesting, that people have these rather different ways of looking at things. But we can value differences in culture without subscribing to what is, to my mind, a pernicious view that our moral opinions have got to stop at our own borders.
Where are the limits? Moral relativists argue that since cultures and people differ, every culture's standards are equally valid, equally true. But how far can one go in accepting and tolerating differences? The death penalty, forced prostitution, genocide? Are there no limits?
When I see pictures of what is going on in Rwanda, when I see pictures of the bestial genocide that goes on there, I cannot help but think that what is happening is deeply wrong. And the fact that others there might have different opinions seems to me, in a case like this, almost irrelevant. I have to ask myself the question, and it's a moral question: does local custom excuse the wholesale slaughter of human beings? And when I put the question to myself that way, the answer, I think, has to be no.
But to say where tolerance should stop poses a tricky problem in the other direction. Can anyone be sure that a moral standard he thinks should be absolute doesn't reflect his own cultural bias? John Finnis proposes some standards.
I think there are some moral absolutes in the area of marriage and sex. Intentionally saying what one believes to be false in order to deceive another person. Intentionally killing another human person. So one has picked out a type of action, and then the moral norm says such actions should never be chosen. So the never is the exceptionlessness, or the unconditional exclusion of such choices, and in that sense unconditional absolute moral absolutes.
One of the things I'm often accused of is believing in universal principles, whereas people say everybody knows that principles are relative, or rules are relative, or values are relative to different communities, and here's this person who believes in universal principles or rules or something. Well, how about the following rule? Never shock people by behaving in a way inconsistent with their culture. Is that a universal rule or a particularistic rule? It's universal because it says never do it in any circumstances. It's particularistic in that its application very much depends on where you are and what time you are, because what the customs are is going to determine, let's say, the bite of that rule. So I find it unhelpful to classify things as universal or particular. You can always look at them in either way.
People differ, cultures differ, and their moral values differ. At a minimum, moral relativism seems to offer the advantages of encouraging open-mindedness and tolerance. But taken to extreme, it also seems to sanction actions that we feel are deeply wrong. Is there some way to keep the advantages of relativism, but define core values that apply to everyone?
Here's what I think can be learned from cultural relativism. In the first place, we shouldn't assume that every practice of our culture is based on some objective, rational standard. There are many practices in our culture that are nothing more than cultural products. And it's easy to give examples. We're wearing clothes. We're not naked. This is just a cultural. This is just a cultural matter. There would be nothing at all morally wrong if we were sitting here without shirts on. It would be nothing at all morally wrong if we were sitting here totally unclothed. I mean, aesthetically, it might not be very nice, but there would be nothing immoral about it. So there are cultural standards that do not rest on any objective right or wrong. Once you realize that, you are free to consider whether other more important things might also rest on nothing more than just cultural prejudices. In our culture, there's widespread prejudice against homosexuals. Some people regard homosexuality as disgusting, somehow morally perverse, or even evil. We can ask, can any good reasons be given for thinking that homosexuals are sinister people, that there is something fundamentally objectionable about gay sex? In the case of slavery, on the other hand, it's easy to come up with arguments to show that slavery is wrong wherever it appears. I think that there is a core, and the core has to do with human welfare. Are people going to be better off or worse off under a given set of social practices? Doing the right thing means acting in such a way that you promote the interests of the people who are affected by your actions, where everyone's interests is given equal weight. That's the core of ethics as I see it.
Suppose human welfare is the core of ethics. We're still left with the problem of how to define human welfare. If a woman discovers her fetus is deformed, does it promote human welfare to get an abortion or not to? This is a value question, and like all value questions, it depends on subjective judgment.
There's a difference between the controversy over whether the earth is flat and moral disagreements, such as a disagreement over abortion. The difference is that the question of whether the earth is flat is a subject that is treatable by science. And science is different from ethics. In science, we can know the truth. In science, we have methods for reaching agreement. What strikes us is that in ethics, we don't have these methods for producing greater agreement.
The distinction between science and ethics is often viewed as having to do with facts versus feelings. One school of ethics contends that all moral judgments are ultimately expressions of personal feeling or emotion. Emotivists, as these philosophers are called, point to differences in how people use language. On the one hand, there are statements of fact. The game begins at 2 o'clock, or all the tickets have been sold. The facts may not always be clear, but ultimately there are ways to settle disagreements. On the other hand, there are statements that express people's feelings. Get that dumb ref off the field, or go for it, Jimmy. These statements aren't being used to establish facts. They express the speaker's emotions. For an emotivist, statements in ethics are like that.
According to emotivism, moral statements have two main functions. They express our emotions, and they offer guidance to people on concerning what to do. So if I say killing is wrong, it's really as though I had said killing, I'm expressing my emotion. And also, I'm asking you not to kill. So saying killing is wrong is like saying killing, don't do it. All right? Now, notice that an expression of emotion is neither true nor false. That's an analysis of moral judgments. Does saying that mean that you're abandoning ethics or dismissing ethics or in some way suggesting that ethics does not have the importance that people might have thought? No, it's just offering an account of what ethics is. I could be a logical positivist, and I can go right on being opposed to murder. I could go right on being a nice person. I could go right on being horrified by lying and cheating and stealing. I can have exactly the same views that I always had, and I can hold those views with the same fervor that I have always held them. I just have a particular philosophical understanding of what I'm doing when I make a moral judgment.
Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. And the record should reflect that we have now been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel and our alternates. Good morning again, ladies and gentlemen.
According to emotivism, it's inappropriate to say that a moral utterance is true or false. It only makes sense to say that about matters of fact. Suppose one person believes O.J. Simpson is guilty of murdering his wife and another doesn't. The facts may never be known to anyone but Mr. Simpson, and both people's arguments may be riddled with prejudice. But either he committed the murder or he didn't. It's a matter of fact. But now suppose the same two people are arguing about the death penalty. They may bring facts into their arguments, but ultimately they're not arguing about facts. They're arguing about the way each of them thinks things ought to be.
In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211. We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant Orenthal James Simpson not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code
In the Simpson case, the two people believe different things, either of which could be true or false. But in the case of the death penalty, they're arguing about what they think is right. To an emotivist, arguments about right and wrong have no foundation in fact. But others dispute this separation.
Everyone implicitly recognizes that there is a question of reasonable and unreasonable choice and action. So emotivism can't be the answer. Emotions can't be the criterion of worth, of right and good.
Suppose a person believes there are criteria for right and good, and that it's possible to establish a core of universal moral standards. Consider the complexity of circumstances that can bear on a practice such as child labor. Most people in the West think of child labor as something to be condemned and abolished as quickly as possible. Children should be at school, playing with friends. Children should be allowed to be children. But a child like Andres can only dream about such innocence. His world is the pitch-dark world of the coal mine. He and his friends work 44 hours a week underground in life-threatening conditions. But before you propose a universal standard against child labor, consider this. Andres' father is dead. His mother is too ill to work. His country, Colombia, doesn't have a social security system. No disability benefits, no widower's pension, no aid to dependent children. If Andres didn't work, there would be no money. There would be no food. How would his family survive? There are over 250 million children like Andres, especially in Latin America, Africa, and Asia, caught in the same web of circumstance. Given their situation, would it really be morally right to abolish child labor?
If we're asking, should we here attempt to suppress child labor or refuse to purchase goods made by child labor, the issue is going to be one of fairness, and fairness means putting oneself in the shoes of the other and seeking to eliminate every form of bias and self-preference. And it's not easy to judge that universally, whatever the condition of the family, whatever the circumstances of the child, and child's relatives, parents and so on. This form of labour, which in our context would clearly be an injustice to the child, is in that context, in the third world, an injustice to the child. If the alternative is some sort of starvation, still no education, still no formation in culture, but the deprivation of the earnings which the child might have made, then it's not clear at all that that fairness, the demands of fairness, the golden rule, justice, identifies just one answer. So one needs to look at the whole situation in a nuanced way.
Often it's not just a choice of imposing our values or just saying, okay, you do it your way. I think there are ways of both expressing what we believe and trying to adjust what we do according to a respect for what others may believe, especially when we see powerful reasons for what they believe.
People differ. Cultures differ. Moral values differ. Moral relativism suggests suspending judgment of others. But should we give even tacit approval to actions such as genocide?
Should we invade to stop? Should we kill people in order to stop them from killing people? These are all very, very serious questions. Nobody can be confident about them. But let's keep separate the question, is it right morally to disapprove? And the answer to that must be yes. Because if we don't disapprove morally, we don't believe what we ourselves think.
We live with people, and we depend on them, even if we disagree with them. We typically don't just disagree with them, we agree with them on some things and disagree with them on other things. I think that more complex situation is the typical situation. And we human beings live with that sort of ambiguity every day, and a lot of the time we manage to accommodate ourselves to each other in spite of the differences. And I think we need to understand the challenges posed by relativism in that context.
The Examined Life is a 26-part series for college credit. To purchase a video cassette or transcript of this program, call 626-796-7300 or visit us online. Please order by program number.